At some point, the fantasy changes, usually around the third back-to-back Zoom call or the fourth consecutive lunch of leftover lasagna in a plastic container that smells faintly of 2020. You realize you don't want to be rich, you want to be left alone. You don't dream of passive income anymore, you dream of passive days. A Tuesday afternoon where nothing happens and nobody expects a thing. A stretch of time where your only obligation is to yourself, and maybe to a late lunch of obscenely fresh noodles in a city where nobody knows your name, and definitely does not have you on their LinkedIn. That's the core of FIRE, financial independence, retire early. It's not really a financial movement, and it's definitely not about being rich. It's about not being tired. It's about having a Tuesday that belongs entirely to you. Not a vacation, not a sabbatical, just a quiet Tuesday where you wake up and don't owe the world a performance. It's a mutiny disguised as a spreadsheet and a half. It's a way of telling the modern work cycle, this infinitely scrolling feed of mind-numbing buzzwords and toxic positivity, to fuck off politely with a well-diversified portfolio and a 3-tab retirement model. It's not an attempt to win anything. It's just to attain the ability to leave quietly before the walls start bleeding. It sounds extreme because it is, but not because it's reckless. The extreme comes from the refusal to normalize a slow 5 decades long erosion of your time, attention and spinal health in exchange for what? A decent benefits package and 2 weeks in Cabo. FIRE is the idea that you can buy back your life, not in a lottery ticket, buy crypto and pray kind of way, but through boring, slow, precise financial planning, which we'll get to. But first, let's talk about what FIRE actually is. FIRE has 2 parts. Financial independence. You no longer rely on work to pay for your lifestyle. Retire early. You stop working for money decades before 65. In other words, first, you build enough capital to never have to work again, and then you stop working. This is simple in theory, but in practice, it's like trying to seduce freedom itself using nothing but compound interest and frugality. You whisper sweet nothings to your index funds and hope they grow fast enough to buy you a life before your hairline finishes receding. Remind me to perform a scalp check once I'm done recording this. Now, to be clear, most people who retire early still work, but it's optional. They work on weird indie films or woodworking or launching a print-on-demand sweatshirt business. The key distinction is they don't need the paycheck. Work becomes play, or at least tolerable. The math hinges on something called the 4% rule. It's a rule of thumb, not a divine commandment, but here's how it works. If you withdraw 4% of your invested portfolio per year, statistically, you probably won't run out of money. So, you figure out your annual expenses, multiply that by 25, and boom, that's your FI number. You spend 40K a year, you need $1 million. You spend 25K a year, you need $625,000. You spend like a mid-tier Instagram influencer with 2 divorces and a cocaine problem, good luck. Better sell some more courses. The difference between retiring early and dying in a cubicle isn't how much you make, it's how much you can live without, and how little you can stand to need. Most FIRE folks live well below their means, not as self-punishment but as strategy. They treat spending the way monks treat masturbation, something that can be done, but not without spiritual costs. You start cooking your own meals, not because you're a chef, but because paying $18 for a sandwich that tastes like a PVC pipe is offensive to both your tongue and your goals. You buy fewer clothes, you drive something used like your sense of optimism. A base Toyota Corolla is the way to go. You stop trying to impress anyone who still uses the phrase work hard, play hard unironically. And slowly you start to shrink your lifestyle down to the size of something manageable, subdued, repeatable, sustainable. Let's break down the moving parts. There's only 3 knobs you can turn: your income, your spending, and your investments. The more you make, the faster you can reach FIRE. But income doesn't help if you spend all of it. Every dollar you don't spend is 2 things at once: a dollar saved and a dollar you don't need to replicate in retirement. You don't just save, you invest anything beyond your emergency fund, typically in broad market low fee ETFs. The goal is long-term compounding. Not timing the market, not day trading, just boring, consistent exposure. This is assuming you don't have any large purchases like a house or vehicle coming up. If that is on the horizon within a few years or less, you should have that money in a very low-risk investment like a high-interest savings account or penny stocks. I'm kidding about the penny stocks, just to be very clear. It's generally not a good idea unless you're extremely lucky, which nobody is in the long run, or if you're insider trading. If you're doing the latter, hit me up please. Your savings rate is the single biggest lever. A simplified way to look at it is this formula somewhere on the screen. If you save a fraction S of your income and spend the rest, which is 1 minus S, the approximate number of years N to reach FIRE is this, where R is your expected annual investment return rate, which is often assumed around 7% to be safe. And this formula assumes constant income and returns and no major expenses. So if you save 10% of your income, it might take you 42 years to retire. If you save 50%, you could retire in 15 years. There are more nuanced equations and calculators for this, but the math is surprisingly intuitive. The more you live below your means, the faster you can buy your freedom. The trick is not becoming a hermit. The trick is realizing that most of your consumption wasn't making you happy anyway. You were just numbing yourself between paychecks. Alcohol is pretty expensive. Blow is very expensive. Hookers too. Well, there's some things you can't control. I'll always buy a good anime figurine if I see one. Just make sure it's in moderation. All of this needs more than a budgeting strategy. It needs something akin to a worldview, almost a rejection of everything your culture told you to want. It's understanding that most of your work stress doesn't come from the labor, it comes from the need, the dependency. You're trapped not because you hate work, but because you can't afford to stop. Financial independence removes the knife from your neck. But that freedom requires some rewiring. You stop buying things for status. You start budgeting no matter how tedious it seems. You redefine luxury as time, not stuff. And eventually you stop saying, I can't afford that, and start saying, that costs 3 months of freedom. Not worth it. You become ruthlessly conscious of what you're trading time for. That's the core of FIRE, not spreadsheets, not dividends. Awareness. So in short, the play is to save aggressively, invest smartly, withdraw sustainably, and don't die poor. But unfortunately, the 3-tab spreadsheet I mentioned earlier begs you to answer these questions. How much life costs now? How much money I have? And can I stop yet? And sometimes, even if tab number 3 says no, you geo-arbitrage. Geo-arbitrage is when you admit that living in the West is too expensive and you move somewhere your portfolio can actually breathe. Suddenly your expenses drop by 50%, your quality of life goes up, and your mental health improves just enough to wonder whether it's still crippling depression or just time zone confusion. I wouldn't call it gaming the system, just moving over to one that wasn't designed to particularly crush you. You don't need to retire into a Vancouver condo with radiant floor heating. You can retire into an apartment in the suburbs of Bangkok with a gecko on the wall and a lovely plate of pad grapao for $2. Of course, geo-arbitrage isn't just sipping mango smoothies in Chiang Mai while your dollar rows multiply like rabbits on aphrodisiacs. There's a moral hangover, an unspoken iffiness to the whole thing. A sense that maybe you're playing life on easy mode in a country where most people are stuck on nightmare. Because while you're there outsourcing your cost of living, someone else is spending their youth, their kidneys, or their children's dental care to keep the infrastructure going. You show up with your fat ETF-fed wallet, smiling politely, tipping well, and pretending that somehow makes it okay. But deep down you know, you're not blending in, you're floating above. And maybe that's fine, but it isn't neutral. There's also this weird colonial tinge to it. A Western passport, a favorable exchange rate, and a loose spiritual crisis wrapped in breathable fabric. This is how empires age now. Not with wars, but with midlife crises and affordable pad thai. The existential trade-off is this. You bought freedom, yes, but was it priced in local currency or in global inequality? And before you guilt spiral into moving back to your overpriced apartment in Vancouver where living costs $11,000 a month and 450 grams of sanity, here's some half-baked solutions. Be useful. Don't just show up and consume. Give something back. Volunteer. Teach. Build something. Not in a white savior way, just in a quiet, consistent, not an asshole way. You'll probably have a lot of time to do that anyway. Speak the language. If you're going to live somewhere, at least try to be intelligible to the people around you. Google Translate isn't quite enough. Learn to say I'm sorry and thank you for starters and then progress to more. Pay more than the absolute minimum. Pay market trade, don't haggle like it's a game. Of course, getting scammed isn't fun, but there's a lot of middle ground between that and lowballing street vendor aunties. Stay in the cracks, avoid expat bubbles and pubs and gated compounds with infinity pools and the crushing smell of avocado toast. Live a little closer to reality. Don't pretend you're local. You're not. You can integrate, but you can't erase where you came from. That's not humility, it's delusion. Even if you don't geo-arbitrage, here's the uncomfortable part. Just being able to consider FIRE means you've already won a lottery. Most people can't retire early because they probably can't retire at all. They're taking care of sick parents, working 2 jobs to cover rent, or living in countries where the currency gets whiplash from inflation every 6 months. And even in high-income countries, things are uneven. Student debt, medical costs, low-paying fields, high cost of living cities. All of these make FIRE inaccessible if not impossible for millions of people. And that's the part a lot of FIRE content forgets. It talks like the only thing standing between you and financial freedom are expensive lattes and excessive laziness. But luck matters, safety nets matter, context matters. If you're not financially underwater, that's not just because you worked hard. It's also because your boat wasn't leaking when the storm hit. This movement, this strange little cult of early retirees and budget spreadsheet fetishes, only exists because of luck. Being born in a country with economic infrastructure, being healthy, getting a decent job, not getting fired after your boss finds your hentai TikTok account. Most variables that make FIRE possible are those most people did not get to choose. So let's not pretend this is a moral path, it's a logistical one. If you can walk it, you're already lucky. If you can walk it and know you're lucky, you might even be decent. I know I've been terribly lucky so far. Hopefully the other shoe doesn't drop anytime soon. Early retirement sounds romantic, but like most romantic things, it can fall apart at some point. Markets can crash, inflation can erode your purchasing power. A family member can get sick, or you can. There's also sequence of returns risk, which means if the market tanks in the first few years after you retire, your portfolio might not recover. That's why many people plan for a buffer, saving 30 to 50% more than their FI number just in case. But the bigger risk is existential. What do you do when you're there? You've hit your number, you wake up, you're free. There's no morning meeting, no awkward small talk in the office kitchen, no Slack notification from Kaylee operations asking if you've had a chance to look into that yet, smiley face. And for a while, it feels like you've made it. You've done it, you magnificent bastard. You walk around during work hours like a trust fund baby. You sit in cafes while other people suffer. You remember what it's like to breathe before 6 p.m. But then something strange happens. The silence gets heavy. The blank calendar feels less like freedom and more like a waiting room. You realize that all this time you weren't just working for money, you were working for structure, for narrative, for the illusion of a life that made sense. Most people confuse being busy with purpose. When that busyness disappears, it can feel like a loss of self. You thought you wanted to write a novel, turns out you just wanted to feel like you weren't wasting your life. Retirement doesn't fix loneliness, meaninglessness, or bad sleep habits. It just gives you a front row seat to them. Be careful what you wish for. Now you have to answer the real question. What do you do when you don't have to do anything? Do you bite the bullet and finally write the novel? Start the band? Learn Japanese? Open a cafe in Portugal that doubles as a sex dungeon? Probably tax deductible if you register it as a wellness retreat. I don't know, ask a CPA. Here's where most FIRE guides stop. Congrats, you made it. But this is where the real trouble starts, because now you have to build a life. Not one made out of tasks and performance goals, but something else. And no one knows what that else is for you. So think about it. But I can talk a bit about what the exit looks like for me as an example. My personal FIRE decision tree sort of looks like this. If I've got fuck you money, I go to Tokyo like a typical weeb. Land of clean trains, introvert dignity, and muscle gold bars. I wander the back streets of Koenji, drink canned coffee with an absurd amount of condensed milk in it, and slowly become a cryptic middle-aged man who only speaks in aphorisms. If I've got a moderate amount of money, I go to Bangkok. The last time I was there, I found this sort of fondness for being that I have yet to find elsewhere. I wear loose linen shirts, read Murakami in cute cafes, and make peace with the fact that I'm still haunted by something or the other. Just a lot better fed and not lacking vitamin D. Yeah. With everything said and considered, even with the luck, the loneliness, the risk of it all, I still think FIRE is worth it. Not because it will necessarily make me happy, but because it gives me options. And in a world that wants to script your entire life from puberty to pension, that's a rare thing. Most people die waiting for permission. FIRE is just a way to stop asking. It's a way to opt out quietly before the machine eats what's left of you.